Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters. And today I'm joined by Caroline Mukiza, and we are going to be talking about choosing a university that is not a UK university. So this is the process of you and your child looking around the world and thinking, do you know what, it's a big world and there's a lot of exciting universities out there, and I think we're actually not going to go the UK route. And I think at home education, because it obviously steps out of the norm and it steps out of the normal way of doing things, I think home educators are a little bit more inclined this way, because I think we think, well, why should we do the thing that everyone else is doing? Let's send them off somewhere wonderful instead. So Caroline is a bit of an expert in this, and so I thought I would bring her on. It's a process that I'm currently going through with my son, looking at universities abroad, and so I thought, let's do an episode on it. So for anyone who is interested in their child going to a university in Europe or a university in America or anything like that, I thought Caroline would be able to just give us her advice on this. So Caroline, first of all, thank you so much for coming on. Caroline and I know each other. We are like friends in real life, IRL. And it's lovely for me to spend an hour talking to you. And so thank you so much for coming on, and do tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your home education journey.
Yeah, so I have got 4 children, aged 25, 23, 17 and 15. The older 2 were schooled, and the younger 2 were homeschooled. Gosh, we could spend an hour just on my kids. So if I start with the homeschooled ones, the 17-year-old was homeschooled from the age of 7 until 16. And he did all his GCSEs and IGCSEs through homeschooling. And now he's at sixth form in a physical school. So he is at the stage where he is applying for universities starting this September, hence looking at universities in the UK and abroad. And then I also homeschool my 15-year-old, who's been homeschooled since just around COVID time, maybe from 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And he'll be homeschooled through GCSEs, and then he'll go to a physical school for sixth form. And then, the older 2 went to physical schools all the way through. And one of them is post-university. She did a degree in software engineering, computer science, is now a software engineer. She went to Edinburgh for university and is now in Edinburgh working as a software engineer. If you send your child to Edinburgh, they will get lost to Edinburgh because Edinburgh is such a lovely city. Have you been, Eleanor?
I have. My family is Scottish, and so
Okay. And then my son, he's kind of a maths head, and he did a maths degree at Imperial's, now doing a maths master's at Oxford, and who knows what he'll do next? Maybe a PhD in maths. He's kind of very maths shaped. We're kind of a maths shaped STEMmy family as well, because I'm an online maths tutor is my full-time job, part-time job. I also write for the Good Schools Guide as well, so I've got lots of feathers in my cap. And what else was that your question? Just introducing myself. My home education journey. Yes. Okay.
It's interesting because you always put your children into sixth form, don't you? You said, because you live in Bahrain and you send your children back to the UK for sixth form. Now, as you know, I foolishly home educated through A levels. I was so foolishly, and I feel like I'm putting the whole world off. But what was it that put you off home educating through A levels?
I think what it was, child number 3, he's always liked lovely, old, historic, ancient things. And we were in the UK one summer, and we said, the local big private fancy school have got an open day, so let's go and have a look, because they've got old traditionals, 500 years old, let's go and have a look. And as soon as he stepped into the grounds, he thought, wow, which is to be expected. But then he saw the chemistry lab, and he's always loved GCSE chemistry, and he'd never been in a lab. And he said, you know what, Mum, I think I want to apply. And I was like, we better speak to your dad. Because, yes. So we actually applied to some physical schools, but we also applied to an online school for A level. He got offers from them all, and but he decided on that one he saw with the fancy grounds.
Yeah, and as somebody who home educated through A levels, I mean, chances are you're probably paid less than I did because it's so expensive. It doesn't have to be, of course, but for
Yes.
some subjects, like because my son obviously did like maths and physics and things like that. I mean,
Mm.
he did self-study some like marine science he completely self-studied, and history he primarily self-studied, but realistically you need tutors for a lot of A-level stuff, and it does get expensive, not to mention paying for the practicals and paying for the
Yeah.
exams. So yeah, it's an expensive business, so I can see why you might have offshored it.
But it's not, I mean, we could do another podcast about that transition because it wasn't straightforward in that, obviously as a homeschooler, you're used to just going on to your lessons if you have online lessons, or studying for a bit and then going off to make a sandwich, and then going on your phone for a bit, and then going on doing some more studies, and then just chilling for a bit. Where school is really regimented, and it was exhausting. You have to attend these waste of time assemblies and like waste of time phone groups. This is quotes from my son. And it's a long day, 8:30 till 4 o'clock. So it was quite an adjustment, and he was sick for a lot of the time just because the trauma on his body of the commute and the long day and the horrible food at school. So that's
Yeah,
not the
big change.
podcast, but I thought, there's always pros and cons to the situation. And even now with my 15-year-old, yes, we've been to look at some physical schools. We've shortlisted some, but then I was still online last week looking at the online A levels because, yeah, it's just, I feel as though we have more control. We're used to being in control as homeschool parents. Is that right?
It is, although in some ways it's nice to give up that control as well, isn't it? I mean, and from somebody who had that control all the way through to 18, their child being 18 is kind of, looking back, I have this kind of sliding doors scenario where I'm like, what would it have been like if you'd have gone to college at 16 and I wouldn't have needed to have this control? Would have been quite nice. Although actually my son is very much a self-starter, so he just kind of did it all himself. But there's no doubt that it's a different experience. So when we were looking at universities, my son is taking a gap year out. And so we are now looking at universities. We're looking at applying round about the end of this year. And my son was very adamant straight away that he didn't want to go to an English university. He was reasonably open to Scotland, very open to Wales, pretty open to Ireland, not at all open to England. And I have to say that I didn't discourage this because my son is super geeky. He's classic homeschooler in as much as he hasn't had those rough edges sanded down. He doesn't conform to the stereotype. Like yesterday, he was striding around Ireland where we are with a cape and a pair of black leather gloves because he thinks he looks like one of his favorite Russian figures from history. So it would be difficult. I can't imagine him in an English university for sure. But we have been looking at universities abroad. And I know that you and I have been having these conversations about universities abroad. So what is it that has led you to look at universities abroad? Because your other two children, they've gone, Scotland and England, haven't they?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And having had 4 children, they're also different. And as you know, even your two are very different in personality. And it's actually, child number 3 is very internationally shaped. And he's grown up in the Middle East, but he's British. But I think he gets on better with international kids, kids who've had an international experience. So that actually was the initial thing that got me thinking. And also, he wants to apply for economics. And I don't know how closely you've been following the bloodbath that is economics entry to universities in the UK.
I know it's very hard to get in.
It is, and the Bath University, and no slights against Bath, but Bath and King's College London were rejecting students with 4 A-star predictions for economics specifically. It's similar for computer science as well. It's very competitive. So economics is the new, cool. It's the new computer science. All the cool kids.
Why does everyone want to do economics?
Because kids don't want to be poor. And they think economics is the path to wealth and riches and not poorness, I think.
That's
And
interesting
I'm
because
like,
my son
yeah.
was super interested in economics, wanted to do it at A level, but
Mm.
then discovered that economics didn't just involve rants against capitalism and, reading Karl Marx, and so decided against it. So he came at it from a really different perspective. He just basically wanted to redistribute wealth. But it's interesting to me
Excellent.
that economics is now become this, I don't know, like a route to, pinstripe suit. Is it that kind of thing?
Mm. Yes, it seems to be. Although you could go on to finance from a history degree and from an English literature degree, and I've explained this to my son, but he said, "No, it makes sense to do economics." So it's very competitive. He will apply to the UK, and we were looking at. I like my kids to do summer schools, just so that they can have a taste of university subjects, some independence, and um, yeah, what else? What else do I like about summer schools? Just 2 weeks away from me, I think, and keeping them busy. And this son, the third one, he did a summer school, a finance summer school. Actually, it's called Young Banker, and there were lots of kids from overseas, China, Turkey, Switzerland. He really enjoyed that, and so that got us thinking about, okay, which other universities are these kids applying to? And he mentioned some names. I got onto Google, I found some groups, I looked on Reddit, and I started making lists and lists and spreadsheets and documents of all these possibilities. So yes, the information is out there, but actually, just realizing that that's an option, was a major thing. There's a whole world out there, and actually, often as Brits, we're well aware that the British universities are accepting a lot of international students. My son, who did his maths degree, and doing his maths masters, out of the 25 of them, there's only 2 of them are British on his maths masters. So, these universities, the British universities, they need to take international students. So, hey, why not take my money and give it to some international universities if Britain is going to make it very difficult for my son, who is bright, but not necessarily 4 A stars bright. And even if he was, there's still a chance he'd get rejected. Let me look at the other options. Does that sound a bit vengeful? I don't know. Does it sound
No, I think
anti-British?
it's
I don't know.
anti-British.
Anti-British. Oh my gosh. But yes. Whereas actually my fourth son, I'm not sure if we would look overseas for undergrad, because I think it does take a child who is interested in different cultures, interested in being away from home, interested in the adventure, and is not going to get sidetracked by the joys and the pitfalls and the bureaucracy. And as a parent, obviously there will be bureaucracy and things to find out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you're right that I think it has to be a choice that isn't just academic, that it has to be, it can't just be, well, this university in Canada has lower admissions than, I don't know, Newcastle. And so, we'll look at Canada because it's such a different experience. And so today for the podcast, we're going to be looking at the financial aspect. We're going to be talking a little bit about entrance requirements and admissions. We're going to talk a little bit about visas and paperwork. We're going to talk a little bit about the different parts of the world and universities in the different parts of the world and how they compare and contrast and what to understand about them. I'd like to talk a little bit about whether it's worth thinking about specific subjects and different parts of the world, and then also a little bit about combined degrees and spending a year abroad as part of your UK degree. So just so everyone's listening, these are the kind of things we're going to be covering. So let's launch first into probably the thing that most people are thinking, which is that this all sounds very lovely, but how does this work when it comes to actually applying? Like, obviously the British system, it's UCAS. I actually know very little about this, but I believe it's UCAS. It's online. You put 5 choices in. I mean, it's how it was when I was doing it, I'm guessing. And then you get first choice, second choice, that kind of thing. And then if you don't get the grades, you go into clearing. So how does it work when it comes to universities that aren't UK universities?
Yeah, how long is a piece of string, Eleanor? So
about 45 minutes in actual fact.
Okay. So okay, I'll backtrack a little bit and say that I'm only an expert because I've done a lot of research, because I need to, because my son's applying. So I'm an expert in a very narrow strand of of universities, specifically ones that are offering economics or business or management style degrees. But obviously, as you know, I have been sending you links for, engineering, physics, maths, because I find things and I say, oh, that'll be good for a friend. Let me send them, this information. So the universities I've looked at, they do accept A levels. All universities around the world. If a university wants your money, they will obviously be open to all sorts of qualifications. The A levels are actually very well respected worldwide. They're seen as a very a strong curriculum. So that's not a problem at all. Even for homeschoolers who use the kind of the US what's the US system
High
where
school
you
diploma and APs
school,
and
and
SAT.
APs, those are all accepted, and you can make your own transcripts. Those are all accepted. We're not applying as homeschoolers, but I can imagine it's probably more straightforward if you apply with APs. SATs are accepted in a lot of places, and A levels. So yes, there aren't really major barriers. There's always going to be options. It might not be the first thing you were thinking. And I also wanted to say that I started looking at this a year ago when my son was starting year 12. But actually, the younger your child is, if you can start looking when they're year 9 or year 10, that's, and start just collecting the information and start looking if it's something you think. Because it's just, there's so many options. The world is big.
I think that's one thing I've really learned, and that I'd like other people to learn, is that if I'd have looked at admissions for subjects for universities back before my son started doing A levels, for example, so say when he was finishing off his GCSEs or maybe a little bit earlier, then I would have lobbied harder, although I did know this information, but I would have lobbied harder for him doing 3 very solid A levels, something along the lines of maths, physics, further maths. Because by doing that, you actually open up a huge amount more options than doing 4, because invariably universities, in actual fact, what I've noticed, not so much in the UK, but abroad, is they're looking for 2 very good grades and the rest is a little bit irrelevant. So I've noticed that particularly for the things like we're looking at, which is like the STEM subjects, it tends to be they want an A in maths, A in physics, or an A in maths, A in chemistry, or A in maths, A in biology, for example. And they don't really care about anything else. So if you know that your child is maybe going to want to go on and do a sciencey or a mathsy kind of thing, there's no point doing 4 A levels. You're just much better off doing 3 very solid A levels. However, the UK system is slightly different, I think, isn't it?
Yes, I would say that. Another main difference is a lot of the universities I'm looking at abroad, it will be an unconditional offer. So in the end, my son will just have to pass. I think that's what do A levels go down to? E. So once he's got an offer, then he'll only need to pass his A levels. But in order to get an offer, you need to have strong predicted grades or strong AS subjects. So I think that's one thing which would have been, if I'd known that earlier, I would have emphasized his, I would have told him, you got to really work hard for your end of year 12 exams. Because quite a few universities are basically, they're happy to take predicted grades, but those predicted grades are often based on exams taken in the summer term of year 12. So
how would that work for homeschoolers then, who obviously don't have predicted grades?
I don't know, but these universities, and for them maybe it's a cash cow, and we could talk about finance a bit later, but I've been on webinars. They've given contact details, email us, reach out to us, ask on the webinars, we can ask questions. So, they're very open. They've got English speaking, admissions people for you to contact. So I guess with just like the UCAS, you just get a tutor. I imagine if I was still homeschooling, I'd just get, an authorized letter from a tutor to give a predicted grade and base it on that. And some schools, but some of the universities will have their own entrance tests as well, which are, especially for science, they'll have like a small maths test, not small, a maths test, for example. And of course, there's the SATs and the ACTs, which are American qualifications, which universities internationally accept as well. And from what I don't know if you know a lot about the SATs, but someone told me it's like the level is like GCSE maths and English, but on steroids. So it's
Maths
fast.
is hard. Maths is
Is it
hard.
hard?
SAT. Yeah.
Is
I looked
it?
at the maths and I was like, wow, that's hard. But then I'm not big on maths. You maybe would have looked at the English bit and thought the same thing, because I know you're more of a maths person than me. But I noticed that when I was looking at the universities abroad, that
Mhm.
their entrance requirements tended to be reasonably low, but they quite often, as you say, wanted you to sit their calculus exam, for example, or wanted you, and quite often, of course, there is a language exam as well, even if the degree is in English. I've noticed that some of the German places seem to want a level of German proficiency.
Yeah, so the German universities, I think they want a foreign language at GCSE. It's mandatory. I
Possibly.
think that's what I understand from one of my tutees. His
Mm.
sister goes to German university, and he is going to apply as well. And he, hates his GCSE French or whatever, or German, but he has to do it. And I think, yes, maybe you do have to have a level of German. I'm not looking at Germany, so I'm looking at Italy and Spain and the US. Those are my countries. Those are my countries, and also Hong Kong. So.
No,
Yeah.
that's interesting, because that sounds to me like two very different university experiences for you as a parent. I don't mean for your child, because I know a little bit about the American university system, and it's 4 years and it's extremely expensive. And then the European university system is invariably 3 years and considerably cheaper. So, as a
Yeah.
parent, I mean, obviously, we all come at this from different financial perspectives, but do
Yes.
you look at them and think, well, what am I getting for my money here? Like, is there a
Mm.
point of view that says, well, actually, Columbia degree is worth it over Milan or something? But or do you take each into consideration and try not to view it in that from that financial perspective?
So one of my special finds has been these things called dual degrees or joint degrees. So Columbia University, you mentioned, they do a joint degree with a university in France called Sciences Po. I must pronounce it correctly, because if I say
Très
Sciences
bien.
Po, my French friends are like, what? Sciences Po? So I will try to say Sciences Po. It sounds very French.
How is that? What is that? How say it the British way, so everyone.
Sciences Po, P-O, Po. Like,
Oh,
isn't the bear from Kung Fu Panda called Po? I think he is. Yeah, Science is Poe.
that must
P-O.
be how they named
Now,
it.
okay, so Science is Poe is a university which is basically, I think, number one in the world for international relations. And they have 7 campuses around France, and each campus specializes in a different region of the world. So they have one in Menton, in the south of France, which specializes in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And they have another campus that specializes in Asia. They have another campus that specializes in the Americas, another one that specializes in Africa. I don't know how many I've done now, but yes. So having been brought up in the Middle East, my child will probably look at the Arabic campus. So for that joint degree, you spend 2 years in France and 2 years in New York, where Columbia is, and you pay the fees according to which campus you are. So you're kind of getting a bit of a discount, because you're only paying for 2 years on the American side and 2 years in France, where the fees are cheaper. It's still a lot of money, but it's still it is cheaper. But for these degrees, they do give financial aid, so you can fill in your tax report form, give all your financial details on your assets and your income, and they will offer financial aid, and they'll tell you that information before you have to accept the offer, so that you'll know in advance what you need to pay. And quite a few universities do that. The ones in Italy I've looked at. Yeah.
They do
Yes.
graduated tuition
Yeah.
fees based on how much you earn.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So
Like the
that's
British system, I think, does that, does it? The Welsh, I know the Welsh has a grant system that does that.
So yes, kind of. Yeah, and
Mm.
all the American universities do that. But um, generally, for the American universities, like, for example, Harvard and MIT, if you are applying and you need a lot of money, then you are at a slight disadvantage. Um,
Let's
so
talk about America and the rest of the world then, because
okay.
not only are they very, very expensive compared to the rest of the world, they have a slightly different, well, they don't all, but a lot of them have a slightly different approach. They have like majors and minors, and so
Mm.
you can do like multiple subjects. And I know that there are some universities around the world that have adopted that scheme where you can do economics, but you can also do Greek, ancient
Oh.
Greek, and yeah, you can sort of combine a kind of weird mixture of subjects. And it's called something, but I can't remember what it is
It's a
called.
liberal arts. It's a liberal
That
arts.
that's exactly
Yeah.
what it is. Thank you. So this, I know that not all American universities are liberal arts universities, but
Yeah.
there's no doubt
Yeah.
a lot of them are, right? It is a
Mhm.
popular thing.
Even
There's no
MIT
doubt,
has that, I think.
really, even
Yeah.
the sciencey ones. Mm.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that the American system, the main difference is that it is extremely expensive. And but for people who are
Mhm.
listening who are thinking, oh, who may be used to the British system, which is about 10,000 a year, I think, tuition fees, and then you can maybe add another 10,000 on for living costs.
Mhm.
You're talking something in the region of about 70, 80,000 a year in America, and it's 4 years. I'm
Yeah.
not wrong there, am I? That's about
You're,
right
you're,
figure.
you're you're not wrong. Yeah, including accommodation, some of them will be hitting 80, 90,000. But they do give generous financial aid. But then, yeah, it's but then the American culture is to start saving up for college from when your child is born. So
Yeah, but for those of
yeah.
us not in that culture, like the British culture, I mean,
Mhm.
I was having a conversation with my American friends when I was over there, and they said yes, they start saving, and I said, so do you pay for your child to go to university? And they were like, yeah, we pay everything, and they said, do you not do that in the UK? And I said, I literally don't know any parents that do that. The only parents I know are ones that have got that their child gets the tuition fees and the student loan, and in
Uh,
the British culture, it's very much the child takes on the debt for their university education.
yeah.
And I'm sure there are exceptions, but that I've not come across them. And I'm sure there are, but I've not encountered it. So for those of us that might think, oh, okay, my child's really good at physics. I want him to go to Caltech because I've watched The Big Bang Theory or whatever. Not that I would be that shallow, but but
I hate that program. Yeah, sorry, as a
just
scientist,
cause.
as a female scientist, engineer, it's just like cringe. It's like, yeah, this is how it was. It was cringe. It's like, yes, okay.
So for those of us that might then think, you know what, America is the best for this subject or that subject,
Hmm.
or I want my child to go to an American university, how would you go about that financially?
Um, all the universities I've looked at in America have financial or fee calculators. You could put your information in and it will churn out a number and tell you how much you'll have to pay. Harvard has it, even Caltech will have it. They've all got financial calculators, so you can have an idea.
But it's never going to drop down to a small
People
amount.
get no people get full rides. They call it full ride. So that means they pay the fees and the accommodation. If you yes, some people do get that. And then yes,
Isn't
based
that
on
just for if you're very good at football or rowing or something? I don't know.
oh, yeah, or if you've done what's it called, the Olympiads, for example, a maths Olympiad, or it depends, because from what I understand from my research and listening to other podcasts, there's a really good, if I may advertise another podcast, inside the admissions office from Yale University. They've got a podcast and they talk. They want to have a variety of students. So actually, just being British means you are different. Does that make sense? Being a British homeschooler, again, they're looking for special children, special types of students, so that they can they want a diverse range of students on their campus.
So for someone listening to this who may have and I want to say this in the nicest possible terms as a mother of two of these, a bog standard child,
Yes.
just like not somebody exceptional and not somebody rubbish, but just like a
Yeah.
normal child who's like reasonably clever and has self-studied through their exams or whatever. Is it
Yeah.
worth them just applying to these American universities and just seeing?
Yeah, but not to Harvard or MIT. But I think there are 2,500 universities in America, and there will be. I found out there's one Colorado School of Mines because my child number 4 is a geology nerd, and yeah, and but that's not in the top. Maybe it's not even in the top 100 universities, but it's very good for geology. And their entrance criteria is probably they'll take students who are not A-star students as such. So and the American system is more holistic. Obviously, Harvard and MIT, when they mean holistic, they want you to be grade 20 violin as well as an Olympiad, and an Olympic medalist. But there are another 2,000 universities in America, and you don't have to have all of that. So yeah,
Okay.
it's worth looking at, worth investigating. I have found so I mentioned Hong Kong because we're not looking at applying just for a Hong Kong university, like a full 3 years at a Hong Kong university, but there's a joint degree with the University of Southern California, Bocconi, which is in Milan, and a Hong Kong UST, University of Science and Technology. So that's like a triple degree, where you spend a year in each location, and which is quite exciting. But an interesting thing about the Hong Kong University on its own is that they actually offer scholarships to any student who gets any student who has 4 A stars in their A levels will get full fees paid for, but they have to pay for their accommodation, which I think it says on their website it's about $7,000 a year. And any student who's got 3 A stars will get a one-off. That's for their entire degree. And any student's got 3 A stars, they'll get 1 year's full fees paid. So that was interesting, random find.
That is interesting.
So, yeah.
When it comes to funding universities abroad, whether it's, hundreds of thousands in America or tens of thousands in Spain, what
Yes.
is the route for British parents? Are there student loans? Are there scholarships, bursaries? What are the options?
Yeah, I think, in the first case, you need to see what's the university offering. So often when I look at my the steps I take when I'm, find out about a university, I go to the, homepage, and then I look what courses are offered. Are they offering courses that are of interest to my child? And then I go to the finance page, and then I go to the, okay, let's see how much it is. They offer scholarships. Do they offer financing? And then I go to the admissions page. So what are the criteria? So those are the main, pages. And then obviously if it's something that goes on the oh yes list, then I'll, have a look at everything else. And I'll look to see, is there a webinar I can join where, I can find out more information and ask, the real questions, do you have lots of British students? What realistic grades, et cetera, et cetera. Because obviously they can't put everything on their websites. So, and a lot of these universities are willing to, give you information. I forgot what the question was. I always go off on a tangent, Eleanor.
So,
Bring me back.
So it sounds like there isn't a student loan or tuition, anything like that.
That's a good one. Okay, so some of the European universities, if you are a European citizen, you can get the local loans. But no, apart from that, it's basically going to be needs-based or merit scholarships. So if your child is very good, then they'll throw some money at you.
And I've noticed as well that from what we've been looking at, 'cause we've been looking in the Netherlands, that the Britain is obviously no longer classified as EU, and so as a result, you then have to apply as an overseas student. And we noticed that sizably increases the fees, something like tenfold. So, have you noticed that at other universities in Europe, for example?
Oh, I see. Have I noticed that at other universities?
Do you have to apply as overseas? Is what I'm saying as a British citizen.
Yeah, the universities I'm looking at in Europe are private universities, so they don't really have that. So, you are paying fees unless you have got financial need. Does that make sense? You're paying the same fees
Everyone
as
pays the same.
a middle class French person would pay, if that makes sense.
So that's interesting, because that's another question then, because are universities in Europe, let's just take Europe, but we can talk about worldwide as well, are they not all state owned then? Are some of them just and what about in the UK then? Are the universities in Yeah, okay, now I'm really confused.
So
who
UK
owns these things?
Yeah, I think UK universities are all state funded, except isn't it Brunel? Isn't Brunel private? I think. And there's a few, very few private universities. But in France and in Spain, there are quite a few private universities, especially ones that are like the business schools. So because we're looking at economics and business and management, um, a lot of places which are well known for their MBAs have started offering bachelor's degrees because they realize there are students worldwide who are interested in the name value because they already have the prestige because of their MBAs. And also, being with other international students. There's a university called IE in Spain, and that's actually 80% internationals. And they have a campus in Madrid and one in Segovia as well. And they do, actually, I think they do a variety of bachelors. So they're known as a business school, but they do bachelors in mathematics, I think engineering, economics. I'm not sure if they do humanities at all. I haven't looked, sorry, I apologize to people who are looking for, English degrees and arts degrees. But yes, and then which other universities? So I know I mentioned to you that I went to visit NYU Abu Dhabi because obviously having links to the Middle East, that's an attractive option. And we were told that actually they don't advertise this on their website, but they do give a lot of merit scholarships to students because they're a very new university. The Abu Dhabi campus is only about 7, 8 years old. And so they are still throwing money at the place to get the best students. And that's a very diverse student body. It's a very nice campus. It feels very safe. It feels very diverse. It's very clean. It's very modern. And
it's got high entrance requirements, hasn't it?
So I told a friend about it. She's British, but also lives in the Middle East, and she went along. And her daughter has B and C at A levels, and was resitting another one to hopefully get an A. And they did the tour. They loved it. They sat down with the admissions officer and said, yes, so tell me a bit about yourself. She said, I've already got some A levels. And she said, oh, yes, I've got a B and a C. The admissions officer was, we've never accepted anyone with a C. So, yes, I think, yes, they need A's, probably. You could probably get away with, maybe one B. But yes, they basically, I suppose, year on year, as more people hear about it, then they can, the academic requirements will be pushed up. But currently, it looks as though you could probably, apply it with just a B. But again, remember, it's what's it called, an unconditional offer as well. So you can actually sit an SAT, you can apply with predicted grades or AS level grades. But when you're given an offer, as long as you don't drop too many grades, then you could still go.
So it sounds like it's worth applying to worldwide universities before you sit the exams, because obviously my son, he's taking a gap year, so he's applying once he's got the results. But actually, it sounds like it's actually quite useful worldwide to sit without the actual results, so you get that unconditional offer.
Yeah, it depends. Some students will do better than in year 13 than in year 12, isn't it? It depends, like what the trajectory is of your child. So you can obviously reapply. So you will have to compare notes because I'm applying in year 12 and you're applying after year 13. So it'll be interesting to compare notes.
When it comes to different universities,
yes.
How important do you think it is that the university is well known for the subject that you want to study there? So, for example, let's say your child is really interested in Greek history. Is it important that you look around and you're like, okay, the best university in the world for this is in New Zealand, so that's where we're going to go? I mean, or is it more important that they go to an established university with a good reputation?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting one. I think you can do either or. I think I would say. So because like even in the UK, Cambridge is the sciencey one, and Oxford is the one for arts and English. But I'm sure someone who goes to Oxford and does maths is not looked down upon, are they? Because the name is it's so wow. So yeah, I think it's worth being open to both.
Because you're
But
looking, aren't you? Because for your son, you're looking for economics, and you are looking for universities that are good at economics, aren't you?
yes, and also who have a well, yes, and so when you look at, I'm using the QS rankings because obviously I'm looking internationally. So the QS rankings are the ones that give the international rankings. And so, yes, I do look at the general rankings, and then I do look at the rankings for, economics and business. So it's worth looking, at both things. And also you'll have a gut feel. You'll have heard of some universities. You mentioned Caltech. You'd already heard of Columbia and Caltech. So you'll know which universities people will have heard of, as such. But I think actually what's I think interesting is that as British children, if they've had an international experience, that will make them an interesting candidate in any case in the job market. So yes. So even if they go to, let's say, Florida, University of Florida, which may not be up there in the rankings, I can imagine an employer saying, "Oh, you're obviously British, but you studied in Florida. Tell me about that." So yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect as
Yeah,
well.
I think you're right. And because I know that from our perspective at the moment, we're looking at my son's looking at engineering, and there are
Mhm.
certain places that are very, very good for engineering, but they're not necessarily on paper very, very good universities, or even universities. A lot of them are technical colleges. And then you've
Yes.
got other places that, for example, might be let's just take Britain, because I just happen to know about this. So engineering, you've got I think it's Loughborough, that has a lot of the automotive engineering. They link to a lot of the F1 teams, yada yada yada. Very, very
Mhm.
good for automotive engineering. Not
Yeah.
particularly, up there as like top three universities in Britain, right? Now, if you're wanting to do a very specific subject, then people within that subject, and when you work in that subject, they will know that you went to Loughborough, and they'll be like, "Oh, Loughborough, that's very good for that subject." But I
Yes.
wonder how much of it, when you're looking at universities as a parent, how
Yes.
how much do you have to pull back from well, you could do automotive engineering at Oxford, and then you get an Oxford degree, but realistically, automotive engineers just don't go to Oxford, right? So, like, how
Oh, I
much of that do you?
see.
Yeah, I mean, do you take
Yeah.
that into consideration?
Yeah, we're very snooty and brand sensitive, actually. So you're asking the wrong person. And my husband's even worse than me. So, and he's done his masters, and he's done his MBA, and from universities with good brand names. So and he's recruited graduates as well, and internationally. Um, into the consulting industry. So yeah, he's very brand sensitive. So I think, we as a family, we try to maximize the name of the university, as such.
Okay, so when you're looking at your European universities and your universities abroad, how do you
Yes.
do that as somebody that maybe, because obviously as British people, we are
Yes.
brought up with a cultural understanding. There was an episode of Blackadder when I was young, and there was a joke about universities, and it said it went to like one of the top three universities in Britain, Oxford, Cambridge, and Hull. And everyone knew it was a joke because Hull is not a top university, right? And it was
Yeah.
it was that was the joke. And we all got that culturally because we all know that Hull
Yeah.
wasn't then a great university. I don't know where it is now. Maybe it's brilliant now. I don't know. But we all culturally know that stuff. Now, how do you then go about looking at universities in the Netherlands or
Mm.
in Italy or Spain, and you don't really know, apart from the QS rankings, how do you know what is a good university and what is a bad one?
Yeah. Okay. So I have an interesting take on that. So I mentioned my son's at Oxford doing his masters, and obviously he knows other master students, in his college and other subjects. And he said that there are students, some British, some internationals, who, for example, went to the University of Loughborough or went to the University of Nottingham, which are not on the same scale as Oxford or Cambridge, but he said they have that top student vibe about them. So you could still go to the University of Hull, University of Loughborough, put all your energy and effort, or be really inspired by your degree, get a really excellent grade, be that kind of person who can present really well in an interview or write, with passion about your subject, and still go on to, a master's in Oxford or Cambridge or LSE if that's, what you want to do. Um, so that's an interesting, it's not just that it's Oxford or bust for undergraduate. And you can have that same mindset as well in looking at universities. And particularly in Germany, I mean, you probably noticed, and what I've read is that Germany doesn't really have, of course, the QS does rank German universities based on its own, ranking based on research, etc. But actually within Germany, it's a very flat system. No one in Germany thinks, oh yeah, the University of Munich is better than the University of Berlin, for example. There isn't that kind of elitism as such. There's respect for all, you've done a degree and you've done well in it, and well done. I think
I noticed that.
Britain is quite classist. We've always been a classist society, and America is as well. But I think us Brits really, we're the masters of elitism.
I think you're right. And I think that's something that I noticed when I was going to university a very long time ago. Like 30 years ago, I noticed that there were technical colleges. There were polys and then there were technical colleges. And nowadays they've all converted to universities. And I've noticed that in Europe, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in Europe, you still get some very good technical colleges and some very highly rated technical colleges. And do you think that's part of this idea that actually, there's an equality that kind of goes through the university and the further education system, particularly in Europe?
I think so, and there's a recognition that students have different strengths. So I just posted a comment on because I'm always in Facebook groups. I just have to post. If I have knowledge, I must post. So I just posted. I went to a university fair at a local private school here in the Middle East, and there was a lovely gentleman from I won't get the name right, but it's called Istituto Marangoni. It's in Milan. Okay, and they specialize in fashion and like luxury fashion management, fashion design, and even you could do a degree in perfumery. Eleanor,
Nice.
isn't that amazing? And they have campuses in Milan, in London, in Dubai, and in Mumbai. And this is, a university, you get a bachelor's of, as such. And I have another friend, she's Italian, and her son is in, I can't remember which bit of Italy, but basically he's in Italy doing a degree in, let me say, hang on. It's basically, it's not just culinary, it's not just a culinary degree, but it's like culinary stuff plus management. So he'll learn how to cook and how to, set up his own business. So I think, we do have those things in Britain, but I think Europe is actually a lot better at doing those, actual practical degrees. So yeah, of course, I'm looking at economics, which is, actually quite an academic subject. But also I am looking at something called a BBA, which is a bachelor, an MBA is a Masters of Business Administration. So now a lot of universities have started a Bachelor's of Business Administration, which is actually a bit more practical. So whereas economics, you have to grind the maths equations, whereas on a BBA, they're going to bring in people from business to talk about, setting up a small business, how big businesses run. You'll have internships as part of, the degree. And a lot of these European universities are introducing these things as well. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, comparing the cultures of different universities and
It
systems.
is, and I think that one thing, I think that when it comes to Europe, I think there is a culture in Europe of having a lot of respect for technical colleges and having particular universities or particular places that are extremely famous or do one thing very, very well. So, like your perfumery place, they're like everyone in the perfumery business would be like, oh yeah, we know this one. And I know for a fact that we found exactly the same thing in the Netherlands. We found this little place. It doesn't feature on any of the QS rankings because it's not a university. And I'd not really heard of it, but everyone in the industry would come from around the world for these graduates because they knew that it was very, very good at what it did. And it's the sort of thing you don't know until you start researching it. Now, Europe, I think, has that very flat system, where everything's very egalitarian and there's a respect for technical colleges. And I think that's cultural. And I think, as you say, maybe the US and maybe the British systems are a little bit more Russell Group, Red Brick, Ivy League. We've got a little bit more of a class system going on, I think,
Yes,
culturally
definitely.
in those two. So let's talk then about the rest of the world. So when it comes to the Far East, I
Right.
have a perception, I don't know how true this is. I have a perception that if you wanted to study something like a STEM subject and you went to
Yes.
Hong Kong or China or Japan, you would be my perception of it is that it would be very high pressured. You would be expected to work very hard, do an awful lot of studying, and there wouldn't be a lot of fun time. There would be a lot of work time. And whereas perhaps if you compare that to America, my perception of doing a degree in America might be that you'd maybe go to a frat house, you'd maybe join some societies, you would like do Dungeons and Dragons. I don't
Yeah.
imagine that Hong Kong students do a lot of the fun stuff. Now, this is purely my
Yeah.
perception of what it's like. Do you think there is something when it comes to choosing the part of the world that your child goes to university,
Yeah.
that there are things that differentiate the different continents, for want of a better delineation?
Yeah, I would say that. So I mentioned that one of the degrees I'm looking at is one with the University of Southern California and Hong Kong and Milan. And from the information I've read in the forums is that the students start off at University of Southern California, so that's very chill. Especially if you've done A levels and APs, it's going to be very chill and easy. And but students are saying it was quite a shock going to Hong Kong because suddenly it's like, hey, you're actually going to do a lot of work.
Yeah, I
So
bet.
yes, I'm not sure if I would necessarily put my child into an Asian university yet. I don't know. Culturally, I think it would still be quite tough. And have you noticed that the Australian universities this year rose up the international rankings? And do you know why?
No, tell me why.
Because they increased the number of students from Asia because of the increase. So because of that, their grades are getting better, their research is getting better, the number of staff they're able to attract as well from the Far East is a higher caliber of staff. So Australian universities are actually getting a bit harder to get into as
That's
well.
interesting because, in actual fact, when my son was looking at marine science, and just to go back to this idea of universities being particularly good for one thing, marine
Yes.
science, the best university in the world, bar none, on all the tables is James Cook in Australia, right? It always tops all of the marine science tables. And yet the requirements to get in are very low,
Yeah.
and it costs hardly any money. I mean, it's like 3,000 a year or something. I couldn't believe it. And I'm guessing that the reason is because it's an awfully long way away, and so they only have a captive audience. Whereas what
Yeah.
you're saying is that actually maybe they're expanding out a little bit.
Expanding, yeah. I mean, I guess universities around the world, they all need money. One interesting thing about Australia is that the culture is that students don't actually leave their city. So again, I think it's quite a flat, although the international rankings will rank Australian universities, if you live in Sydney and go to the University of Sydney, that's fine. If you live in Canberra and go to the University of Canberra, that's like, oh, that's good. You've done engineering here, that's good. That's
Oh,
fine.
that's
Not,
interesting.
it doesn't have that kind of like, Oxford, Cambridge. Melbourne and Sydney are, famous universities internationally, but Canberra, is well known locally as well. So
Hmm.
it is more of a flat system. And also the A levels compared to the Australian system, A levels are way stronger because I tutor some Australian students, and A levels are definitely more stronger, a
Yeah,
stronger qualification than the
and
Australian
compared
system.
to the APs as well. I know when I did the podcast on the APs, I was really surprised that they're 1 year, half the content, and yet they equate across when you apply to university to an A level, which to me is absolutely insane. But however, so the Far East, I'm glad to know it's not just my prejudices here, because that's certainly the impression I get. I know that the South Korean system, for example, is extremely high pressure, and that culturally you're expected to put a lot of effort in, such that you're basically exhausted, and that's a sign that you've done good work. So when it comes to other parts of the world, so let's talk then about the Middle East, because I know that's where you're based. What about university culture there? In as much as are there things that, if you were applying to universities in the Middle East, that you would want to know about if you're a British parent?
Oh, interesting. So the Middle East has always had international universities. So traditionally, I think over the past 50 to 70 years, they've always had an American University of, and then whichever city. So American University of Sharjah, of Bahrain, of Dubai, of Abu Dhabi, etc., of Beirut,
And these are
etc.
liberal arts universities, I'm
And
guessing.
these, American liberal arts.
Mm.
But in recent times, as I mentioned, NYU Abu Dhabi, um, Georgetown, I think, is in, where's Georgetown? Is that in Qatar? And Carnegie Mellon, that's another one, which is in Qatar, I think. So Georgetown is, that's what's it called, Specialists University for Journalism, I think, and politics. And Carnegie Mellon, I think, as well, is in that similar international relations field. And then University of Birmingham has opened in Dubai. I think the issue with the University of Birmingham, Dubai, is that everyone is paying £25,000 equivalent. And so there is no, if you're a British student, you don't get a discount. You're basically kind of paying international fees there. So
And these campuses as such, these aren't. I know that when I lived abroad, there are a lot of schools like Harrow School, Shrewsbury School, Bromsgrove School, etc., all around the world, and they didn't have particularly strong links back to their mother school, if you like. It was predominantly a kind of branding thing. But I get the impression from speaking to you, but also speaking to a lecturer that I know, that these campuses are actually just in effect just another campus of the university, right?
Yes, yeah. So NYU have campuses in Shanghai as well as in Abu Dhabi, and they also have some smaller campuses like in South America and Africa as well. And students at NYU Abu Dhabi, I'm because I've visited and I've done a lot of research, and I think will apply. They get to spend a semester in New York as well. So, they maintain the connection. So that's something to look at as well if you are applying to one of these, international universities in a different country. How much time do they get to spend, at the main university? And what's the reputation versus the main university? One thing I do like to look at or ask when I'm asking questions on a webinar is, what do your students go on to do? Who are they employed by? What places do they go to for their masters? Because they can tell you, "Oh, we're a brilliant university," but actually, what's the proof? What if I'm going to pay for 3 or 4 years? What's my child going to be doing after that? What are their chances? How will you help them achieve their goals?
When it comes to the Middle East, I think that there may be people listening that wonder whether that's going to be very expensive as an option, because obviously the Middle East tends to have whole different economies when it comes to money. I know that from my time in Bahrain, everything was kind of doubled, and if you look at the currency exchange rate, it tends to give you a good indication of how much things cost in different Middle Eastern countries. So do you think the university education is very expensive over there, or is it?
It probably is, but they still do this kind of financial needs based. So you can still apply for financial aid, they call it. So yes.
Okay, so if you were, say, for example, I don't know, I'm just going to pluck figures out of the air, but if you were earning like less than 30,000 a year or something like that, do you think is it that kind of financial aid you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Okay. And I think you have to fill in what, assets you have. So do you own a house, and how much are you paying for your mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. There probably is that stage where if you're kind of in the what's it called, the middle class, where, we as middle class people sometimes, they fall out, they're too rich to get financial aid and too poor to pay out. So, it's kind of, but it's worth a lot of these places do have these financial calculators. So it's definitely worth trying that. But it's not going to be, the Middle East is not going to be a cheap option. In fact, I think internationally is not going to be a cheap option for, some people. Yes, but if you are on very limited means, it's actually a very good option, because you could end up getting, as we say, a full ride, so with no debt, and they will pay everything, your accommodation, your travel, your books and your fees. So yes, you have to do your due diligence and see is this something that would work for my family? Is that something? Yes. Okay, and also it could be something that's an option, at the master's stage, because obviously in the UK, the masters, you do get, I think, a student loan for the masters, for master's degrees. But obviously a lot of universities internationally also do funded masters as well, so it's worth looking. And generally PhDs internationally are all funded, so it's, even if you start looking and there's a university that looks nice but at the moment it's not financially viable, it's still good to have that knowledge of what is available in the long term.
Okay, and I'm aware that there's parts of the world that we've not covered. So I want to very quickly ask about Africa and South America. I know that I know almost nothing about these regions when it comes to university, and so I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but do you have a sense of, are there particular subjects or places that you think when it comes to those two continents that are, maybe worth thinking about if you're a British student?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I have met like my son's friends at university went to like University of Beirut or University of Casablanca. So, there are routes from, African universities, Middle Eastern universities, third world universities, even in, South America, to, top universities worldwide. I'm not sure though. I'm not sure if it's not an area I've looked at. Um, yeah, for my own child as such.
All right.
Yeah.
So very lastly, I wanted to ask you, I know that I know that it's one of those things. It's a bit like when you've got like a weird physical symptom and you Google it and you really wish you hadn't Googled it because it's like a black hole of nightmare and you're about to die of like throat cancer or whatever it is, right? So when it comes to applying to university abroad, I find it a little bit like that. You go on Google and you're like, oh my God, I really wish I had not even looked into this. So,
Mhm.
are there websites you can recommend? And also, so two-part question. Are there
Yes.
places or websites that you'd recommend? And secondly, how do you actually go through the filtering, sifting process of working out which of these degrees are actually taught in English?
Oh, I think I sent you a good link, didn't I? Didn't I send you a good link where
That might
you
help
could
me, but it doesn't help the people listening.
it doesn't help. Yes, I can't remember the name of the of the do you remember the website? Have you got
Was it
it? Shall I
Dad? Was it called Dad or Dard or something?
Oh, yeah, let's have a look. And so I think, and you could filter for country, no, you could filter for course and taught in English as well. I mean, one really good Facebook page I've found, or group, is called Flown Abroad Full Time version. It's called Flown Abroad Full Time version. So this is basically American parents who've been onto this international thing for a while, because not all of them want to pay £90,000 or dollars a year. And so they've been sending their kids to European and British universities and Irish universities as well. We didn't mention Ireland actually, but to Irish universities as well. And they've actually got, there's like 4 or 5 years worth of posts of people saying, oh, this is a good school in Europe for this subject and it's taught in English. So that's a brilliant Facebook group to look at. So Flown Abroad full-time version. So, and I also look on Reddit. So there is, I can't remember what the subreddit is, but usually if you look at the university name, so remember Sciences Po, if you just put that into Reddit, there was a subreddit dedicated to that particular university, and you can just search for English, for example, and it'll come up with courses in English. And also just use the QS international rankings and see. And you'll probably find that a lot of the top 200 universities will have jumped on this teaching courses in English bandwagon, because their own students from their own countries will want to might want to study in English as well as attracting international students. And there's students from Asia who, will have been educated in English as well. Singapore, it has a system where the students are taught in English. So I think these universities have cottoned on to the fact that having courses in English is actually going to be good for them, to give a diverse student body as well as, maybe help financially.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And what I'll do is in the session notes, I will put any links that we can think of that might be helpful for people who are looking for particular websites or looking for this, because it can feel a little bit intimidating. And I know that one of the things I really found through home educating was how alone you sometimes feel in it. You know, how
Yeah,
little guidance you get and how little support, and how it feels a little bit, because I've been doing it a long time, so I started a long time ago, like you're the first person doing it almost. And
definitely.
obviously there's more and more of us now, and that helps a lot. But when it
Yeah.
comes to being British and going to university abroad, I know that we're both on a very good Facebook group called What I Wish I Knew About University. I believe it's called that. And it's a really extraordinarily good Facebook group. I absolutely love it. It's very, very informative. But when I go on, and I have on occasion and gone on and said, oh, has anyone looked at doing marine science abroad, or has anyone gone to this university, it tends to be a bit bushweedy. You know, everyone's a bit like, no, I don't know anything about that, but have you thought about Bath or Bristol or whatever? And so it isn't
Yeah.
great for that. And so sometimes it can feel a little bit like, am I the only one
I'm
wanting to
mad.
do this?
What am I
Yeah,
doing? Am I ruining my child's future? Oh my gosh.
that's all the usual home ed crises that we have, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
well, what I'll do is I'll put those links in the show notes, and if anyone has any questions who's listening to this and has questions that they think Caroline might or might not be able to answer, do feel free to leave a comment, and I read all the comments, and I will certainly get back to anybody who asks any questions, and I will do my very best to answer them. But Caroline, thank you so much for coming on. I know that you and I are both kind of feeling around in the dark a little bit when it comes to this.
We'll have to do a follow-up and tell everyone where our children ended up. Maybe they'll end up at Bath or Hull. And they'll be terribly happy and amazingly successful.
Absolutely. Well, I looked around Bangor, and you know, Bangor is the kind of university that you just don't hear about, but actually it was just so lovely, and everyone was really nice, and the campus was beautiful, and they were super welcoming of home educators. And I just thought, oh, I wish all universities were like Bangor. I just want to go to Bangor.
They've just opened a campus of the University of Strathclyde near me in Bahrain. It's
Oh, really?
bizarre. And but it's actually not that strange, because someone at my gym, she was doing her master's degree via the University of Strathclyde. So mostly remote, but then she went to Strathclyde for like 3 weeks to do the in-person. So yeah, it's
I
interesting.
yeah, I think that COVID, and the universities in particular, went super online during COVID, and a lot of them have stayed online since COVID. And I know that a lot of parents in some of the Facebook groups moan a lot about this, you know, that they're paying an awful lot of money, and realistically their children are just sitting at home watching a Zoom lecture. And I think that actually that has made it more accessible worldwide, in as
Oh,
much as you sort
yeah.
of think, well, you know, why not go to you know, Senegal and study something? You know, realistically there's no reason. If it's going to be zoomed across from America anyway, you may as well be somewhere sunny. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on and guiding us through that. And if anyone has any questions or comments, do leave them in the comments wherever you are hearing us now. And thank you, Caroline, it's been lovely chatting.
It was fun.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.